Snow was falling so hard it erased the road behind him. A former soldier stood alone on a frozen mountain, shotgun in hand, facing a billionaire's machines tearing through the forest. He had 45 days to prove the land was his. They had 45 reasons to make him disappear. Beneath that mountain lay a secret sealed since the Cold War, a vault of rare earth metals worth hundreds of millions, and the only thing standing between corporate power and federal theft was a man everyone thought was broken. But they forgot one thing. He wasn't alone. At his side stood a scarred K9 who had survived war, fire, and explosions, a dog who could sense danger before it moved. And when the first blast shook the valley, everything changed. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Spokane in late January had a way of making even daylight feel thin. The sky hung low and colorless over the river, and the wind came off the water like a blade, clean, relentless, and personal. Snow didn't fall in dramatic curtains here. It sifted in slow, dry grains, collecting along curb lines and the cracked seams of parking lots, then hardening into gray ice that refused to melt. In the pre-dawn hours, the city sounded hollow, distant plows scraping asphalt, a train horn traveling through frozen air, the occasional cough of an engine that didn't want to start. If you were warm, you could call it bracing. If you weren't, it was punishment disguised as weather. Rowan Hale slept with his boots on. The cab of his 2003 Ford F-150 smelled like old canvas metal, and a stubborn trace of pine, something that clung to his clothes after days in the lumberyard. He was 41, built the way men got built when they'd carried too much weight for too long, shoulders rounded slightly forward, arms roped with muscle that had stopped being for show and turned purely functional. His hair, once a dark brown, had started to fade at the temples into iron gray. He kept it clipped short because long hair caught in hard hats and because mirrors were not something he sought out. His face was angular, a hard jaw with a pale line where a scar disappeared into his beard. The beard itself was close-cropped, uneven in places, the kind that grew in when a man forgot shaving mattered. His eyes were a washed hazel that looked lighter when he was tired, and he was always tired. There was a tightness to his gaze, like he was always measuring the room for exits and threats he couldn't name. 6 years earlier, he'd been Staff Sergeant Hale, Ranger Tab, quiet competence, the kind of soldier who spoke only when it mattered. An IED in Kunar Province had not taken his life, but it had changed the shape of it. He'd walked away with his legs intact and his pride mostly unbroken, but he'd come home with a nervous system that believed every sudden sound was a signal. The VA counselor called it hypervigilance. Rowan called it being alive. Vargo called it his job. The dog lay curled on the passenger seat atop a folded wool blanket, a sable and black German shepherd with a broad chest and an old soldier's patience. Vargo was 8, maybe 9, his muzzle dusted with gray like frost, one ear permanently notched from a long-ago bite that had healed wrong. He wore no vest this morning, just a worn leather collar and a clipped lead looped around the headrest. His eyes, dark amber, steady, opened the moment Rowan shifted, not because he startled, but because he tracked Rowan the way a compass tracked north. Vargo's presence filled the cramped cab with a sense of order. He was trained for the chaos Rowan couldn't always control, explosives, search patterns, obedience under stress. But his real talent, the one Rowan hadn't expected, was how he could feel a storm building in Rowan's chest before it broke. When Rowan's breath shortened, Vargo would press his weight against Rowan's thigh and hold, anchoring him to the moment with warmth and pressure and a quiet insistence. Stay here. Stay now. Rowan blinked awake at 4:18 a.m., the numbers glowing red on the dash clock. Ice had webbed along the inside corners of the windshield. He flexed his fingers, stiff, cracked at the knuckles, and pulled the beanie lower over his ears. Outside, the parking lot behind the big box store was a flat expanse of sodium lights and frozen slush. A few other cars were scattered near the far fence, people who'd learned which corners the security round skipped. Rowan had learned, too. He wasn't proud of it. Pride didn't keep you warm. He reached into the center console for his phone. The battery icon sat at 22%. No missed calls, no new messages. His bank app loaded with a slow spin, and then the number settled into place. $517.18. He stared at it without moving, as if the act of looking might change the digits. "Not today," he murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. Vargo lifted his head, ears angling forward. Rowan scratched the dog's neck, fingers finding the thick fur beneath the collar. "Morning, partner." Vargo's tail thumped once, controlled as if he didn't waste energy on anything that didn't matter. Rowan's day had a shape now. It wasn't a good one, but it was predictable, and predictability was the closest thing to safety. He would drive to the lumberyard before sunrise, park where the foreman couldn't see his truck was also his home, and work a shift stacking bundles of 2x4s until his back burned. The job was temporary, paid under the table by a contractor who didn't ask questions, which was both a mercy and an insult. Then he'd take Vargo to the Riverside Trail for a walk, stop at a gas station bathroom to wash his face and comb his beard, and eat whatever he could afford that didn't require a fridge. He had tried the other routes, forms, interviews, that bright tone hiring managers used when they said they supported veterans, and then asked gently if he had any limitations. The honest answer was yes. His limitations had names: insomnia, panic, the sudden blankness in his mind when too many people talked at once. None of those fit neatly on an application. At 5:02 a.m., he started the truck. The engine coughed, shuddered, caught. Vargo shifted into a sit, ready to move. Rowan drove out of the lot and into the grid of Spokane streets, the city still half asleep under its crust of ice. The river was a black ribbon through snow-buried parks. Streetlights reflected off slick pavement like smeared gold. Half an hour later, at a red light near Division Street, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Idaho area code. Rowan's first instinct was to ignore it. Unknown numbers were collections agencies, recruiters, scams, wrong turns. But something made him answer. Maybe boredom, maybe the cold, maybe the way Vargo's ears flicked as if he heard something Rowan didn't. "Hale," Rowan said, voice rough from lack of sleep. A pause, then a man's voice. Measured, professional, not young. "Mr. Rowan Hale." "Yeah. This is Martin Sloan calling from Sloan and Ketteridge in Boise. I'm an attorney. This is a sensitive matter, Mr. Hale. Do you have a moment to speak privately?" Rowan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The light turned green. He didn't move. "Depends," Rowan said. What's this about?" "An estate," Sloan replied. "Your uncle, Mr. Elias Crowther, passed away." "You have been named sole beneficiary." Rowan let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. "You've got the wrong guy. I don't have an uncle." "Elias Crowther is your mother's brother," Sloan said gently, like he'd expected resistance. "We located you through your military records and a prior address in Tacoma. I can confirm identifying details if you'd like." "May I?" Rowan's stomach tightened at the mention of Tacoma, of a life that had been different. His mother's voice surfaced in memory, sharp, tired, protective. She'd never spoken of any brother. If there had been one, it was buried. "Go on," Rowan said, slower now. Sloan confirmed Rowan's date of birth and his mother's maiden name, then paused as if giving Rowan space to catch up. Rowan's mind did that thing it did under stress, scanning, assessing, trying to find the trap. "What did he leave?" Rowan asked. "A property," Sloan said. 42 acres near Elk Ridge, Idaho. There's a cabin on the land. The structure is old. The land is remote." Rowan pictured a cabin like the ones in postcards, smoke curling from a chimney, a porch swing, a kind of peace people bought on weekends. But Sloan's tone wasn't selling peace. It was selling complications. "There are conditions," Sloan added, and there it was, the hook. "Mr. Crowther's will requires that you take residence on the property for a minimum of 45 consecutive days. Additionally, you cannot sell or transfer the property for 1 year from the date of possession. If you fail to meet the residency requirement, the property reverts to a community development trust in Clearwater County." Rowan stared through the windshield at the moving traffic, at a woman crossing the street with her hood pulled tight. His first thought was ridiculous. 45 days? I can't even sleep 45 minutes without waking up. His second thought was darker. Why would anyone put a clause like that in a will unless they wanted to trap someone? And why me? Rowan said. The question came out flat. We weren't close. I didn't know him. You were the only next of kin we could identify, Sloane said. There is also a small travel stipend from the estate, $2,000 to facilitate your relocation, provided you accept the terms. $2,000. Rowan felt the number land in his mind with weight. It wasn't a fortune, but it was gas, food, a motel for a night if he had to. It was a warm meal without counting quarters. It was a door that wasn't locked. Vargo leaned forward, on a nose close to Rowan's elbow, sensing the change in his breathing. Rowan rubbed the dog's head without looking, the motion automatic, grounding. What's the catch? Rowan asked. Besides the 45 days. Sloane hesitated. There have been inquiries about the property in recent years. Mr. Crowther declined all offers. Some parties may contact you once they learn of the transfer. Parties, Rowan repeated, like buyers. Like interested parties, Sloane said carefully. I'm obligated to inform you that the area is isolated and winter conditions can be severe. If you choose to proceed, I would recommend you prepare accordingly. Rowan could almost hear the unspoken part. I recommend you don't. Lawyers were trained not to say what they meant. The light turned red again. Rowan realized his foot had been hovering above the gas the whole time. Send it, Rowan said finally. The paperwork. Address is… Hold on. He rattled off a P.O. box number he used for mail, the only stable thing he could claim. Sloane's voice softened just a fraction. Understood. I'll email as well. Mr. Hale, one more thing. Mr. Crowther left a key ring with the deed. It includes a key that does not correspond to the cabin. I cannot explain it beyond that. You'll find it in the packet. Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with Spokane's wind. A key to what, then? I don't know, Sloane admitted, but your uncle seemed to believe you would. The call ended. Rowan sat through the green light without moving until a horn blared behind him. He jolted, heart punching hard against his ribs, then forced himself to breathe, in, out. Vargo pressed against his thigh. Steady pressure, a living weight. Rowan turned off onto a side street and parked near a snow-buried park. For a long minute he didn't speak. He watched his breath fog the cab, watched Vargo's ears rotate toward distant sounds, always listening, always ready. Idaho, Rowan said at last, tasting the word like it might be foreign. A cabin. Vargo stared at him, calm as stone. Rowan looked down at his hands, scarred, trembling slightly from too much caffeine and too little sleep, and then out at the pale horizon. He had spent years thinking the world had decided what he was. A veteran who couldn't settle, a man who drifted, a problem with paperwork attached. But a cabin in the mountains with a strange key and a will full of conditions didn't feel like charity. It felt like a test. And if there was one thing Rowan understood, it was tests. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a dog biscuit, broke it in half, and handed one piece to Vargo. Looks like we're going on a road trip, he said, voice low. Vargo accepted the biscuit with careful teeth, then licked Rowan's fingers once, a small, precise gesture that felt almost like agreement. Rowan started the truck again. The engine vibrated through the seat, familiar and flawed and still alive. He eased back onto the road, the city sliding past in frost and exhaust, and somewhere deep in his chest, under the old fear, under the constant tension, something else stirred. Not hope exactly, but motion. A direction. He didn't know yet that the cabin wasn't an inheritance. It was a summons, and the key in that envelope wasn't for a door. It was for a secret that had been waiting decades for the right hands to find it. Rowan left Spokane before dawn 2 days later. The sky a dull iron sheet pressed low over the city. The estate packet had arrived by overnight courier to his P.O. box, thick cream envelope, formal, heavy in the hand. Inside had been the deed, notarized and precise, a cashier's check for $2,000, and a ring of keys secured with a brass tag engraved E.C. The largest key was old iron, ornate and impractical. The second was smaller, standard cut. The third was narrow and long, its teeth irregular, almost star-shaped at the bit, as if it belonged to machinery rather than a door. Rowan had turned that one over in his palm more than once, feeling its edges press into his skin. He didn't know why Sloane's words about the key unsettled him more than the residency clause, but they did. The truck groaned as it climbed east toward the Idaho line, chains rattling faintly against the rear tires. Vargo sat upright in the passenger seat, posture alert, watching the world through the windshield with the focused stillness of a working dog even when no vest signaled duty. Snow thickened as they left the interstate, the road narrowing into a ribbon carved between black walls of pine. Rowan drove with the caution of someone who understood how easily metal could betray you on ice. He kept both hands at 10 and 2, eyes scanning not just the road but the margins, tree lines, blind curves. The discipline was muscle memory, drilled into him years ago. He did not drive. He assessed. Elk Ridge did not announce itself with a sign so much as with absence. Fewer houses, then fewer lights, then a single gas station and a general store sharing the same cracked parking lot. The sky seemed larger here, the silence less forgiving. Rowan pulled in for fuel and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in 1998. The bell over the store door rang when he entered. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 50s, compact and square-shouldered, gray hair pulled into a tight braid that hung down the back of a faded flannel shirt. Her name tag read Marlene Pierce. Her skin was weathered in a way that suggested decades of mountain winters. Her eyes were sharp, assessing but not unkind. She looked Rowan over in a single efficient sweep, the boots, the beard, the dog waiting just outside the door, then nodded once as if she'd placed him in a category she understood. "Road's rough past mile marker 12, she said without preamble. Her voice was low and even, a voice that did not waste syllables. "You headed up there?" "Crowther property," Rowan replied. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "That cabin." She leaned back against the counter, arms folding. "Didn't think Elias had family." "So I've been told." Marlene studied him another moment. "You staying?" 45 days, Rowan said. "At least." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Winter's a bad time to learn a mountain." There was no challenge in her tone, only fact. "You got heat?" "Wood stove if it works." "Hope it does," she said. "And hope you don't mind company." Rowan's gaze sharpened. "What kind of company?" "Developers, surveyors, folks with shiny trucks and clean boots." She pushed a bag of dog treats across the counter without charging him. They've been sniffing around that ridge for years. Elias told them to get lost. He wasn't the friendly type. "Was he the stubborn type?" Marlene's mouth twitched. "Stubborn is polite. Man lived like he was guarding something." Rowan paid in cash. As he turned to leave, she added, almost as an afterthought, "Sheriff will come by. He always does. He's thorough." Outside, Vargo stood in the snow, breath steaming, watching a black pickup idle at the far edge of the lot. Rowan noticed it too. Newer model, lifted, windows tinted. The driver's silhouette was broad-shouldered, still as a post. When Rowan met the driver's gaze through the windshield, the truck pulled out slowly, heading north. Rowan filed it away. The road beyond mile marker 12 became a different thing entirely. Less road, more suggestion. Ruts cut deep into frozen mud. The snow drifted across the bends. The truck bottomed out once, metal scraping stone. Vargo braced automatically, weight shifting to counterbalance the jolt. Rowan eased forward, engine humming in protest. The cabin appeared without warning, a dark geometry against the white. It sat in a clearing that looked carved rather than chosen, surrounded by pines that leaned inward as if conferring. The structure itself was built from hand-hewn logs gone almost black with age. The roof sagged slightly at one corner. Moss clung to the shingles like an old scar. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. Rowan parked 20 yards away and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt thick, almost deliberate. He listened. No engines, no wind through branches, just the faint tick of cooling metal. "Stay," he murmured to Vargo, then opened the door. Her cold air cut through his jacket instantly. He approached the porch cautiously, testing each board with his weight before committing. The iron key slid into the lock with resistance. He turned it slowly. The mechanism groaned, then gave. The door opened inward on a single large room. The smell hit first. Dust, old wood, something faintly metallic beneath it. Light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating a stone fireplace dominating the far wall. A rough table sat near the center, one leg shorter than the others. A bookshelf leaned crooked in the corner, spines faded beyond legibility. The air was dry at least, no mold, no rot. Rowan stepped inside. Vargo followed without command, nose low, mapping the room in scent. He moved with measured precision, checking corners, the space beneath the cot against the wall, and the shadowed gap behind the stove. Satisfied, he returned to Rowan's side. Rowan set his duffel down and moved to the stove. He crouched, ran a hand along the iron surface, cold but intact. He opened the firebox, ash and old charred wood inside. He could work with that. He spent the next 2 hours in motion, clearing debris, stacking split logs from the small woodpile out back, testing the hand pump at the sink. Brown water coughed out once, then ran clearer after several strokes. The cabin was primitive, but not beyond saving. It felt less like a ruin and more like something paused mid-sentence. Mid-afternoon brought the sound Marlene had predicted. An engine approached along the rutted path, deliberate, unhurried. Rowan stepped onto the porch as a county cruiser rolled into the clearing. The vehicle was older, your paint dulled by years of use. The man who emerged from it carried himself with the relaxed authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sheriff Caleb Rourke was in his early 40s, close to Rowan's age but built differently. Thicker through the torso, less defined, strength softened by time. His face was broad, clean-shaven, with a faint crease between the brows that suggested either chronic skepticism or old headaches. His hair was cropped short beneath a brown Stetson. He wore the uniform like it belonged to him. "You Hale?" Rourke called, not unfriendly but not warm. "That's me." Rourke approached the porch but did not step onto it. He took in the cabin, the stacked wood, the dog at Rowan's heel. His gaze lingered on Vargo. "Working dog?" "Retired," Rowan said. Retired how?" "Military." Something shifted in Rourke's expression, respect perhaps, or calculation. "Well, welcome to Clearwater County." He hooked his thumbs into his belt. "You plan on staying?" 45 days. "That's what the paperwork says." Rourke nodded. "Just so you know, there's been interest in this land. Mining company, mostly. They've got permits to survey adjacent parcels. You see anyone on your side of the line, you call me." "And if I see them drilling?" Rowan asked. Rourke's eyes flickered. "They won't, not without paperwork." Rowan held his gaze. "Good." Rourke studied him a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Road's going to get worse before it gets better. Stock up while you can, and keep that dog close." The cruiser reversed carefully and disappeared down the path, while Rowan remained on the porch until the sound faded completely. Vargo's posture had shifted during the exchange, ears forward, muscles taut but controlled. The dog did not trust easily. Rowan had learned to respect that instinct. Inside again, Rowan moved to the bookshelf, drawn by the way it leaned slightly away from the wall. He straightened it and felt resistance. Something blocked it from settling flush. He knelt, fingers tracing the edge of the floorboards. One plank sat a fraction higher than the others. He pried it up with the claw of a hammer from his toolkit. Beneath lay a narrow cavity, dust-coated but deliberate. Inside rested a metal tube, sealed at both ends. Rowan's pulse quickened, not with fear but with recognition. This was not random storage. This was intention. He lifted the tube out and unscrewed one end. A rolled sheet of paper slid free, aged but intact. He unrolled it on the table, a hand-drawn map, topographical lines sketched with care, the cabin marked clearly. Half a mile behind it, near a ridge, a red X and a single word written in block letters, Aurora. Rowan stared at it, the cabin suddenly feeling smaller around him. Vargo placed his head against Rowan's thigh, sensing the change in his breathing. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, a distant engine revved once and then went silent. Rowan folded the map carefully and slid it back into the tube. He replaced the floorboard, tamping it down until it sat flush. He had planned to endure 45 days, fix the stove, survive the cold, leave. But this wasn't just a cabin in need of repair. It was a place someone had guarded. And now, apparently, so was he. The night settled over the clearing like a lid closing on a box. By the time Rowan secured the shutters and coaxed a steady flame from the wood stove, the sky had turned a hard, metallic blue fading toward black. The temperature dropped with deliberate cruelty, seeping through the log walls in thin, needling drafts. The cabin creaked as the wood contracted. Every sound carried farther in the cold. Rowan did not turn on the overhead lantern immediately. He preferred low light. Shadows were honest. They showed you where things might move. He sat at the rough table, the metal tube resting near his elbow, the map inside it still fresh in his mind. The word Aurora felt less like a name and more like a warning. Vargo lay near the stove, front paws crossed, ears occasionally flicking toward the door. At 8 or 9 years old, the dog had matured into that rare stage between strength and wisdom, where speed had slowed a fraction, but judgment had sharpened. His coat, thick and double-layered, trapped warmth close to his body. In firelight, the sable fur showed copper along his shoulders and black along his spine, like armor painted by nature. His breathing was slow, steady, but not asleep. Rowan knew the difference. An hour into the dark, the engine returned. Not close this time, further down the ridge, but distinct. Rowan stilled. Vargo lifted his head at once, muscles tightening without visible motion. The engine idled for perhaps 30 seconds, then cut. Silence reclaimed the clearing, but it was no longer the same silence. It had edges. Rowan rose, moving with deliberate calm. He doused the lantern and stepped to the window, wiping a small circle clear of frost. The clearing lay still under moonlight. No headlights pierced the trees, but that did not mean absence. "Stay," he whispered. He slipped outside, boots crunching softly over packed snow. The cold bit instantly at the skin around his eyes. He circled the cabin, moving low, checking the tree line, scanning for the unnatural geometry of a parked vehicle. Nothing. But when he reached the edge of the clearing, he crouched. Fresh tracks, not deer, not elk. The tread pattern was too uniform, deep and spaced with mechanical precision. A TV tires, 2 sets, one overlapping the other, circling the outer perimeter but not crossing into the clearing itself. Testing distance, measuring. Rowan followed the track a few yards until it disappeared into the timber. He did not pursue further. When he returned to the porch, every step controlled, filing the information away. This was reconnaissance, not intimidation. Someone wanted to know if he was alone. Inside, he locked the door, added a wedge of wood beneath the handle, and sat again. Vargo approached and placed his head on Rowan's knee. Rowan exhaled slowly. "They're curious," he murmured. "That means we're interesting." Sleep came in fractured segments. At 3:17 a.m., a sudden snap of wood outside jolted him upright, heart hammering, vision narrowing. For a moment the cabin dissolved, and he was back in dust and heat and the metallic taste of adrenaline. He pressed his palm to Vargo's flank, grounding himself in fur and warmth. Just trees, he told himself, just wind. By morning the sky had shifted to a pale white, snow threatening again. Rowan stepped outside with coffee, steaming in a chipped enamel mug, and studied the tracks in daylight. They were clearer now. He measured the tread width with his boot. Large tires, likely utility grade. Not kids fooling around. He ate quickly, then retrieved the metal tube and unrolled the map again. The red X marking Aurora lay roughly half a mile upslope, beyond a narrow ridge that cut east-west behind the property. The terrain lines suggested a shallow depression, perhaps an old cut or sinkhole. He strapped on his pack, clipped Vargo's working lead to his belt, not because the dog needed it, but because it gave Rowan a tactile sense of connection, and stepped into the timber. The climb was steady and quiet. Snow muted sound, but Rowan still moved with the controlled foot placement of a trained scout, avoiding brittle branches and distributing weight evenly. Vargo ranged slightly ahead, nose sampling the air, occasionally doubling back to ensure Rowan followed. The dog's confidence in terrain translated to Rowan. It steadied him. Halfway up the ridge, Vargo froze. It was not a bark or a growl. It was stillness, absolute and immediate. Rowan felt it through the lead before he saw it. He dropped to one knee and scanned forward. Through a sparse stand of pine stood a man. He was tall, easily 6'2", with a lean frame that carried itself with casual authority. He wore a charcoal field jacket over dark denim, boots too clean for daily labor. His hair was silver at the temples, but thick, styled back neatly. A trimmed beard edged his jawline with calculated precision. Even at distance there was polish to him, the kind money purchased and maintained. His posture was relaxed, hands loosely at his sides, but Rowan recognized the subtle shift of weight that suggested readiness. The man did not appear startled. "You must be Hale," he called, voice smooth, carrying easily across the snow. Rowan rose slowly. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled, not broadly, but enough to show even teeth. "Damon Kincaid." The name hung in the cold air. Rowan did not react outwardly. Kincaid stepped closer, boots barely leaving a mark in the snow. "I own several parcels adjacent to this ridge. We've had interest in the mineral survey here for years." His eyes flicked briefly to Vargo, assessing, then back to Rowan. "You've inherited something valuable." Rowan held his gaze. "So I've heard." "Valuable to me," Kincaid clarified. "Perhaps less so to you. And I imagine mountain living wasn't part of your retirement plan." Rowan noted the deliberate phrasing: retirement, not survival. "A test." "What do you want?" Rowan asked. Kincaid's expression remained patient. "To make this simple, I'm prepared to offer you $100,000 for a quiet transfer. You keep the cabin for your 45 days if you like. We handle the rest." Rowan considered the number. It was not small. It was also not proportionate to Kincaid's confidence. "And if I decline?" Rowan asked. Kincaid's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "Then we remain neighbors." He glanced toward the ridge. Winter is unpredictable here. Accidents happen, roads close, supplies run thin. There it was. Not a threat exactly, but proximity to one. Vargo shifted forward, hackles rising slightly. Rowan placed a firm hand against the dog's shoulder. "Easy." Kincaid studied the gesture with interest. "Fine animal," he said. "Military?" "Yes." "My father served," Kincaid replied, tone smooth but distant. "Came back different, never quite adjusted." His jaw tightened faintly. "The mountains suited him. They don't suit everyone." There was something genuine beneath the veneer, but it was buried deep. Rowan recognized the shape of a man who had learned early that vulnerability cost more than it returned. "I'm not selling," Rowan said. Silence lingered for a beat too long. Kincaid nodded once. "Very well. I'll give you time to reconsider." He turned slightly, revealing a snowmobile parked just beyond the tree line, engine idling low. "Good luck, Mr. Hale." He rode off without hurry, leaving a faint ribbon of exhaust drifting through the trees. Rowan stood motionless until the sound faded completely. Then he looked down at the snow where Kincaid had stood. Clean boots, deliberate placement, not a single wasted movement. "Interesting," Rowan murmured. They continued upslope. The ridge flattened into a narrow plateau. The trees thinned, revealing a shallow depression partially concealed by brush and drifted snow. Rowan recognized the contours from the map. He approached cautiously. At first glance it appeared natural, a hollow formed by erosion, but the edges were too uniform, the grade too clean. Rowan brushed away snow with gloved hands, metal, a curved surface beneath packed dirt, cold and unyielding. He cleared more, exposing a circular steel hatch, weathered but intact. Faded lettering ran along its edge. It was nearly swallowed by rust. Aurora Project, 1957. Rowan's breath slowed. Vargo circled the perimeter, nose low, then returned to Rowan's side and sat. A signal. Someone had been here recently. The scent was faint but present. Rowan ran his fingers along the rim of the hatch. A wheel mechanism sat at its center, stiff with age. Beside it, a narrow key slot shaped unlike any standard door. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the ring of keys. The long, irregular key caught light in his hand. For a moment, Rowan simply held it, feeling the weight of intention behind the design. Elias Crowther had not left random heirlooms, he had left tools. Rowan slid the key into the slot. It fit. He did not turn it yet. Instead, he scanned the ridge once more, the tree line, the open slope, the distant glint of sunlight on snow. If Kincaid had followed, he would see movement. Nothing moved. Rowan exhaled and wrapped both hands around the wheel. "All right," he murmured to Vargo. "Let's see what he was guarding." He began to turn. The wheel resisted at first, frozen by years of neglect and the mountain's indifference. Rowan leaned his weight into it, boots braced against the rim of the hatch, breath fogging in quick bursts. Metal groaned, a low, reluctant sound that seemed to travel into the earth itself. Vargo stood close behind him, not restless but alert, ears rotating toward the tree line every few seconds. The dog's body had shifted into working posture, head slightly lowered, spine level, weight distributed evenly. He sensed the threshold as surely as Rowan did. The wheel gave an inch. Rowan paused and listened. Nothing. Only wind threading through pine needles. He turned again. Rust flaked beneath his palms. The mechanism clanked, internal tumblers shifting after decades of silence. Finally, with a heavy metallic sigh, the hatch loosened. Rowan lifted it carefully. The hinge protested, then held. Cold air exhaled from the opening, carrying a scent that did not belong to forest. Stale metal, old oil, something faintly electric beneath it, like machinery that had once hummed and remembered how. A steel ladder descended into darkness. Rowan did not rush. He studied the interior with narrowed eyes, scanning for tripwires, structural weakness, signs of recent disturbance. The ladder rungs were corroded but intact. He clipped a small flashlight to his vest, tested its beam, then crouched beside Vargo. "Down," he murmured. Vargo moved first without hesitation, stepping onto the ladder as if it were another obedience drill. His weight was balanced, claws finding grip against rusted steel. Rowan followed, closing the hatch halfway above them, but not sealing it completely. When the air grew denser as they descended, the temperature steady rather than biting. 20 feet down, boots met concrete. The beam of Rowan's flashlight swept the space slowly. It was not a cave. It was a constructed chamber, walls poured in thick slabs of aging concrete reinforced by steel ribs. Dust coated the floor in undisturbed layers except for one narrow path leading toward the far wall. A bank of industrial light fixtures hung overhead, long dead. On one side of the room stood rows of wooden crates stamped with faded black stencils. Aurora, Strategic Material Reserve. The font was government plain, unadorned, and precise. Rowan moved closer to the crates. He ran his gloved fingers over one lid, feeling the grain beneath decades of dryness. A pry bar lay against the wall as if left in expectation. But he picked it up and eased the lid open. Inside were stones, not decorative, not polished, rough, irregular chunks the size of grapefruits. At first glance they appeared dull gray. Rowan lifted one. It was heavier than it had any right to be. He adjusted his grip, feeling density beyond granite, beyond iron. The surface felt faintly warm despite the ambient chill, not heat exactly, but retained energy. He angled the flashlight beam across it. Embedded within the gray were subtle flecks of metallic sheen. "Jesus," Rowan murmured. Vargo sniffed the edge of the crate, then backed slightly, not fearful but cautious. The scent was unfamiliar. Rowan replaced the stone and crossed the room. Against the far wall stood a metal desk bolted to the floor. Its drawers were locked, but the top surface held a stack of file folders, brittle with age. Why, he opened one carefully. The header read, "United States Geological Survey, 1958 Analysis." Rowan scanned the first page, pulse slowing as comprehension replaced curiosity. Iridium concentration, unprecedented. Scandium trace volume, commercially viable at scale. Extraction potential, strategic military and aerospace applications. He leaned back slowly. Iridium was not a common word in daily life. It belonged to scientific journals and procurement contracts, to satellites and missiles. Rowan had heard it once in passing during a briefing years ago, mentioned alongside rare earth elements critical to defense infrastructure. The memory surfaced unbidden. A captain explaining supply chain vulnerabilities, foreign dependencies. This chamber was not a forgotten mine. It was a vault. He flipped through additional documents. While one report noted that the Aurora deposit had been sealed, pending classified assessment during the Cold War, then administratively suspended after funding reallocation in the early 1960s. There was no mention of transfer to private hands, which meant if Kincaid believed he owned this ridge, he was either misinformed or lying. Footsteps above. Faint. Indistinct. Rowan's body reacted before his mind finished the thought. He snapped off the flashlight and moved toward the ladder, heart settling into combat rhythm. Vargo pressed close to his leg, silent. Snow shifted overhead, then the muffled crunch of boots near the hatch. Rowan did not climb immediately. Instead, he listened. Two voices. One was deeper, confident, with the lazy cadence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The other was younger, uncertain. "No, told you he came up here," the deeper voice said. "Tracks don't lie." "Maybe he's just hiking," the younger one replied. "Not in January." A shadow passed across the partially closed hatch. Rowan made a decision. He climbed halfway up the ladder and pushed the hatch open fully, emerging into cold daylight in a single controlled motion. His presence was abrupt enough to startle the younger man, who stumbled back. There were two of them. The younger one could not have been more than 25, narrow face, patchy beard that had not fully committed to adulthood. He wore a branded jacket from Kincaid Resource Group, logo stitched neatly above the pocket. His eyes were wide, darting between Rowan and the open hatch. The older man stood several feet behind him. He was broader than Kincaid, thick-necked, his shoulders heavy beneath a canvas work coat. His beard was full but uneven, gray creeping into black. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, splitting the hairline. His eyes were pale blue and flat, like winter sky. He did not appear surprised. Name recognition came slowly. This had to be Gideon Shaw, Kincaid's operations supervisor. Rowan had seen him once in a newspaper clipping pinned to a bulletin board in Marlene's store, shaking hands at a town council meeting. Former mining engineer, laid off during a collapse in Nevada 15 years earlier, then resurfaced as Kincaid's right hand. The kind of man who survived economic disaster by aligning himself with stronger currents. "You lost?" Rowan asked evenly. Gideon's gaze flicked briefly to the open hatch, then back to Rowan's face. "Private property," he said. His voice was gravelly, worn down by cigarettes and years underground. "You're trespassing." Rowan did not smile. "This parcel belongs to me." "For now," Gideon replied. The younger man shifted nervously. "Boss said not to engage." "Shut up, Trent," Gideon said without looking at him. So the younger one had a name. Rowan stepped fully out of the hatch, leaving it open deliberately. "You drilling up here?" he asked. Gideon's expression hardened slightly. "Surveying adjacent land, that's legal." "Adjacent," Rowan repeated. Snow began to fall lightly again, flakes catching in Gideon's beard. For a moment none of them spoke. Then Gideon's gaze drifted to Vargo, who stood just behind Rowan, silent and coiled. "That dog trained to bite?" Gideon asked. "Only when necessary," Rowan said. The older man gave a short, humorless chuckle. "You planning to stay up here long?" 45 days, Rowan replied. Gideon nodded slowly. "Mountains test men," he said. "They tested me once." His hand flexed unconsciously near his hip where a holster imprint showed beneath the coat. "Some of us adapt." "And some of you sell," Rowan said. Trent's breath caught audibly. Gideon's eyes sharpened, but he did not rise to the bait. "You should think carefully," Gideon said at last. "You don't know what you've stepped into." "That makes two of us," Rowan replied. Gideon held his gaze another second, then turned without further comment. Trent followed, glancing once over his shoulder at the open hatch, before disappearing down the slope. Rowan watched until they were out of sight. Then he looked back at the chamber below. This was no longer about curiosity or inheritance. It was about leverage. He descended once more and gathered several of the most critical documents into his pack, along with one small stone from the crate. Not enough to cripple the deposit, but enough to prove existence. He sealed the hatch carefully, locking the wheel and wiping fresh snow across the surface to obscure disturbance. As he and Vargo descended the ridge, Rowan's thoughts were sharper, more ordered. Kincaid had not been bluffing. He had known. The ATV tracks, the watchful engine in the night, the immediate appearance of Gideon, all confirmation. Back at the cabin, Rowan fed Vargo and built up the fire before sitting at the table with the documents spread in front of him. The stone rested near his hand, dull gray under firelight, heavy with implication. 45 days suddenly felt less like an obligation, and more like a countdown. The fire burned low but steady, casting amber light across the scattered documents on Rowan's table. Outside, the snow had thickened into a quiet, persistent fall that erased edges and softened sound. Inside, the air smelled of resin and old paper. Rowan sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, one hand resting unconsciously on Vargo's shoulder. The dog lay pressed against his leg, warmth radiating through denim and bone, breathing slow and even. On the table between them sat the dull gray stone from the bunker, small enough to conceal in a jacket pocket, heavy enough to feel like a promise or a threat. Rowan read the documents again, slower this time. The language was bureaucratic but precise. The Aurora deposit had been logged as a federal strategic reserve. The site was sealed pending review. No transfer of mineral rights was documented. Yet that the classification stamps were faded, but still visible beneath dust and time. If these papers were legitimate, and they looked it, then Kincaid was not simply interested in the land. He was sitting on something that belonged to Washington, not Elk Ridge. Vargo's ears lifted slightly before Rowan heard the vehicle, not the deeper hum of a snowmobile. This was the higher whine of a smaller engine struggling against incline. Rowan rose, crossing to the window without turning on additional light. Through the frosted pane, he saw a single headlamp cutting through falling snow. The vehicle emerged slowly into the clearing, a weathered Subaru Outback, mud-splattered roof rack half loaded with tools. It stopped near the edge of the clearing, but did not approach further. The driver stepped out. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean. Dark hair pulled into a low ponytail beneath a knit cap. Her face was narrow but expressive, cheekbones high, skin windburned from outdoor work. She wore a heavy canvas jacket patched at one elbow and boots that had seen real terrain, not staged wilderness. Her movements were deliberate but not cautious. She did not look like someone accustomed to being intimidated. Rowan opened the door before she could knock. "You hail?" she asked, voice clear, direct. "That's me," she nodded once. "Dr. Clara Mendoza." She extended a gloved hand. "Geochemist." Rowan didn't take it immediately. "Didn't know I ordered one." A faint smile touched her mouth. "You didn't. I was surveying the Clearwater watershed last summer. Elias Crowther contacted me. Said he had concerns about subsurface contamination risk. We never finished that conversation." Rowan studied her face for deception. He found curiosity instead. "He mentioned Aurora?" Her expression changed, sharpened. "So you found it." That was the answer enough. She stepped back slightly, giving space. "I'm not with Kincaid," she said. "Quite the opposite. I've been tracking his exploratory permits for 2 years. He's good at paperwork, too good." Vargo emerged behind Rowan, positioning himself between them. Clara's eyes softened at the sight of him. "He's beautiful," she said quietly. "Working line?" "Retired military," Rowan replied. She nodded with genuine respect. "My brother served. Afghanistan. Came back different." Her voice dipped briefly but steadied. "He didn't have a dog." Rowan noticed the way she said it, not as accusation, not as self-pity, but as acknowledgement of absence. And something in her posture carried the weight of that loss. "You drove up here in this weather alone?" Rowan asked. "I've driven worse," she replied, "and I figured if you'd open that hatch, you'd need someone who understands what's under it." Rowan stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, Clara removed her gloves, revealing long fingers stained faintly at the tips. A scientist's hands, practical and precise. She approached the table and her eyes fixed immediately on the stone sample. She did not touch it until Rowan nodded. She lifted it carefully, feeling its weight. "Dense," she murmured. She angled it toward the firelight. "Iridium veins embedded in a silicate matrix. That's rare. Very rare." She looked up at Rowan. "Do you understand what this is?" "Strategic," Rowan said. "Yes." She placed the stone down gently. "Iridium is corrosion-resistant, high melting point, critical for aerospace components and advanced electronics. And scandium, if the reports are accurate, strengthens aluminum alloys, lightweight, durable, military applications, renewable energy infrastructure." She exhaled. "This isn't a small deposit. If the data in those files is right, it's one of the largest untouched reserves in North America." Rowan absorbed the information without visible reaction. Inside, calculations shifted. "And if Kincaid drills?" he asked. Clara's expression darkened. "The extraction process requires chemical leaching. Improper containment could contaminate groundwater for miles. The Clearwater River feeds 3 counties. He'd need oversight, environmental review, which he won't get if he keeps this quiet." "And you?" Rowan asked. Why are you here?" She met his gaze directly. "Because Elias Crowther believed someone would try to exploit it. He wanted an independent assessment before he died. I owe him that. Rowan watched her carefully. No visible tremor, no rehearsed cadence. She believed what she was saying. A knock interrupted them. 3 sharp raps on the door. Rowan's spine stiffened. Vargo moved instantly into a silent guard stance, weight forward, tail low but steady. Rowan approached the door without opening it. Who? Sheriff Rourke. Rowan exchanged a brief glance with Clara, then opened the door halfway. Rourke stood on the porch, hat dusted with snow. His eyes flicked past Rowan into the cabin, registering Clara in a single sweep. Evening, he said. Got reports of unauthorized activity on this ridge. From who? Rowan asked. From a concerned landowner, Rourke replied evenly. Clara stepped forward. I'm Dr. Clara Mendoza, independent geochemist. I was consulting with Mr. Crowther regarding potential environmental impact assessments. Rourke's jaw tightened slightly. You got permits to be up here, Doctor? Private property invitation suffices, she said calmly. Rourke looked between them, reading the room. His gaze dropped briefly to the table behind them, to the scattered documents. You planning on digging? He asked Rowan. Not tonight, Rowan said. Silence stretched. Rourke shifted his weight. There's tension in this county. Folks don't like surprises. Keep things civil. His eyes lingered a second longer on Clara. And if you plan on starting something federal, I'd appreciate a courtesy call. Rowan understood the subtext. Rourke did not want outside agencies descending without warning. We'll let you know, Rowan said. The sheriff nodded once and stepped back into the snow. After he left, Clara exhaled slowly. He's walking a line. So are we, Rowan replied. The snow intensified outside, wind beginning to gather behind it. Clara removed a folded map from her jacket pocket, topographic overlay with geological markers highlighted in yellow. She spread it beside Rowan's. I ran isotope sampling last summer along the lower creek, she said. There are trace signatures downstream consistent with exposed ore, which means someone's already testing the perimeter. Gideon Shaw, Rowan said quietly. Clara's eyes sharpened. You've met him. Briefly, she nodded. He lost 2 men in a mine collapse in Nevada 15 years ago. Poor ventilation. He survived because he was on break, she paused. He's been chasing stability ever since. Rowan leaned back slightly, absorbing that. So what's the move? He asked. Clara looked at him steadily. Documentation, evidence, you have original files. I can run independent verification on the sample. If the data holds, we take it federal. Quietly, before Kincaid accelerates. And if he doesn't wait? Rowan asked. Clara met his gaze without flinching. Then this stops being about minerals. Vargo shifted, sensing the shift in tone. He moved closer to Clara now, sniffing her sleeve once, then settling as if satisfied. Outside, wind rattled the cabin walls harder. Rowan rose and fed another log into the stove, sparks lifting briefly into the flue. 45 days, he murmured. He thinks he can pressure me into selling before that, Clara nodded. He doesn't know you. Rowan glanced at Vargo, then back at the document spread across the table. No, he said quietly. He doesn't. The wind howled once across the ridge, long and low, carrying with it the sound of something metallic shifting in the distance. Machinery, perhaps, repositioning in the dark. Rowan did not move toward the window this time. He stayed at the table, hands resting on federal seals and rare earth signatures, the weight of history and profit and responsibility settling in the room around him. The lines in the snow were drawn, and none of them were accidental. The storm arrived before dawn with a violence that felt intentional. Wind pressed against the cabin walls in steady, muscular gusts, driving snow horizontally across the clearing until the world beyond the windows disappeared into a white churn. The chimney rattled. The stovepipe hummed faintly as the heat fought its way upward. Rowan had been awake for an hour already, seated at the table with a mug of black coffee gone cold in his hand, listening to the rhythm of the wind and to the quieter rhythms inside himself. Vargo lay stretched across the floorboards near the door, his sable coat catching the firelight in muted copper tones, one ear tilted toward the outside as if tuning to a frequency humans couldn't hear. At his age, 9 now, if Rowan calculated correctly, he had learned the difference between harmless weather and something moving within it. Clara had left before sunrise, driving back toward town to prepare her equipment and upload preliminary notes to a secure server she trusted more than local infrastructure. She had insisted on it. "Data doesn't protect itself," she'd said, shrugging into her canvas jacket. Rowan had watched her taillights vanish into falling snow and felt the weight of temporary solitude settle again. He did not dislike being alone. He disliked being unprepared. The first sign of escalation came not as sound, but vibration. The cabin floor trembled faintly, a subtle tremor that traveled through the boards and into Rowan's boots. He stood immediately. Vargo rose in the same instant, body taut but controlled. Then came the engine. Not the narrow whine of a snowmobile, not the distant purr of a pickup. This was heavier, industrial, diesel-fed, slow, and deliberate. The vibration deepened. Rowan moved to the window and scraped a narrow band clear with his sleeve. Through the blowing snow, he saw yellow metal cutting a jagged path through the timber at the far edge of the clearing. A bulldozer. Its blade pushed through drift and brush alike, chewing up young saplings with indifferent force. Behind it followed two snowmobiles, dark silhouettes weaving through snow, engines revving high and sharp. Rowan's jaw tightened. Vargo stepped closer to him, hackles rising in a controlled ridge along his spine. There was no barking, only readiness. Rowan opened the gun locker built into the cabin wall, old but functional, and withdrew a 12-gauge shotgun left by Elias Crowther, cleaned but rarely fired. He did not load it immediately. He set it on the table within reach. The bulldozer stopped at the tree line 20 yards from the cabin. Its engine idled loudly, exhaust mixing with snow into gray plumes. The two snowmobiles cut around the clearing, circling like predators measuring terrain. The driver of the bulldozer climbed down. Damon Kincaid moved through the storm without visible hurry, coat collar turned up against wind, but posture erect. Snow collected briefly on his shoulders before melting against insulated fabric. His face was composed, silver hair slicked back despite the weather, trimmed beard precise as ever. He carried no visible weapon. He did not need one to project control. Behind him dismounted Gideon Shaw, bulkier and heavier gear, beard frosted with snow. And two additional men followed, workers likely, bundled in dark jackets, faces obscured by goggles. Rowan stepped onto the porch before they could approach the door. He did not lift the shotgun, but he made sure it was visible inside through the open doorway. Kincaid stopped several feet from the porch, boots sinking slightly into fresh powder. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," he called, voice raised just enough to cut through wind. "Unfortunate weather." Rowan said nothing. Kincaid glanced around the clearing as if inspecting a property he already owned. "I had hoped we could resolve this privately," he continued, "but you forced my hand." "By staying on my land?" Rowan asked. Kincaid's smile was faint, almost indulgent. "Ownership is often a matter of perspective." Behind him, Gideon's eyes flicked toward the cabin door. "I'm scanning for movement." Vargo's low growl vibrated against Rowan's thigh. "You can't legally breach this parcel," Rowan said evenly. "Federal Reserve documentation exists. I have copies." Something shifted in Kincaid's gaze at that, not surprise exactly, but confirmation. "You misunderstand," Kincaid replied. "I'm not breaching, I'm reinforcing. That ridge is unstable, there are safety concerns." He gestured toward the bulldozer. "I intend to conduct preventative grading to mitigate landslide risk." "In a blizzard," Rowan said. "Timing is rarely ideal," Kincaid replied calmly. Gideon stepped forward half a pace. "You should step aside," he said. His voice carried less polish than Kincaid's, more edge. "This doesn't need to get complicated." Rowan held his ground. Wind gusted hard enough to sway the cabin slightly, while snow swirled around them in thick sheets. "Last offer," Kincaid said. 200,000. Today. Walk away." Rowan did not look at the bulldozer. He did not look at the men. He kept his eyes on Kincaid's. "No." The silence that followed felt sharper than the cold. Kincaid's expression did not change, but something behind it hardened. He turned slightly toward Gideon. "Proceed." The bulldozer's engine roared higher. Rowan reacted instantly. He stepped back into the cabin, grabbed the shotgun, and fired a single round into the ground 5 feet in front of the blade. The blast echoed across the ridge, startling birds from trees. The bulldozer halted. Snow settled slowly back into place. Kincaid did not flinch, but the men behind him did. "You fire on equipment, that's escalation," Gideon warned. "You move that blade 1 inch forward, that's trespass," Rowan replied. Vargo barked once, sharp, commanding, then fell silent again, stance squared, muscles primed. For a moment the storm itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, in the distance, a different sound cut through the wind. Helicopter rotors. Faint at first, then growing. Kincaid's head tilted slightly upward, eyes narrowing against snow. The helicopter emerged through the storm from the southern ridge, dark against white sky, descending carefully into the clearing's far side. The downdraft scattered snow in violent spirals. It touched down awkwardly but intact. From its cabin stepped a man in a dark parka marked with a federal insignia barely visible through swirling snow. He was tall, mid-40s, angular face carved by long years outdoors. His beard was short but thick, peppered with gray, and his eyes were sharp and calculating beneath the hood. He carried himself not like a bureaucrat, but like someone accustomed to field operations. He approached steadily, boots cutting deliberate lines in snow. "Damon Kincaid," he called over the wind, "you have a habit of forcing urgency." Kincaid's posture shifted subtly, respect without deference. "Agent Whitaker," he replied. So that was the game. Agent Ethan Whitaker stopped between the two camps, gaze moving from Rowan to the bulldozer to the open shotgun. "Care to explain why I was pulled out in a storm?" Kincaid gestured vaguely toward the ridge. "Safety mitigation." Whitaker's expression remained unreadable. "Funny. My office received digital files this morning suggesting the Aurora deposit remains federal property." Rowan felt a flicker of recognition. "Clara." Whitaker turned his attention to Rowan. "You hail?" "Yes." "You have documentation?" "Inside." Whitaker nodded once. "Then we're not grading anything today." Kincaid's jaw tightened fractionally. "With respect, Agent, this land is under federal review until further notice," Whitaker finished evenly. "And you know that." Snow thickened again, whipping around them. Gideon's eyes darted once toward Kincaid, uncertain. Kincaid held Whitaker's gaze a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them. History, perhaps. Then he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Whitaker did not respond. The bulldozer engine cut. The snowmobiles idled down. And Kincaid and his men retreated toward the tree line, machines reversing carefully out of the clearing. Rowan lowered the shotgun but did not relax. Whitaker approached the porch alone. Up close, his face bore the look of a man who had seen more political maneuvering than he liked. A faint scar ran along his jaw, likely old and mostly forgotten. "You escalated quickly," Whitaker said to Rowan. "They did first," Rowan replied. Whitaker's eyes shifted briefly to Vargo. "Nice dog." "He's better than I am," Rowan said. Whitaker allowed a faint hint of a smile. "I'll need copies of everything you have, and that sample." He paused. "You understand this gets complicated?" Rowan nodded. "Already is." Whitaker glanced toward the retreating figures in the storm. "Kincaid's been trying to legitimize adjacent drilling for years. If Aurora's intact, he's been very patient." "And now?" Rowan asked. Whitaker looked at the ridge, at the snow erasing fresh tracks. "Now he knows you're not." The helicopter lifted minutes later, carrying initial copies of the documents and leaving Rowan alone again with wind and snow and the smell of diesel fading into forest. Vargo relaxed gradually, muscles unwinding but eyes still sharp. Rowan stepped back into the cabin, closed the door firmly, and leaned his weight against it for a moment. The storm howled louder now, as if approving the confrontation. 45 days had become something else entirely. This was no longer a matter of inheritance. It was a standoff. And it had only just begun. The storm did not end so much as exhaust itself. By late afternoon, the wind weakened into intermittent gusts, leaving behind a landscape stripped clean and rearranged. Snow lay knee-deep across the clearing, burying tire tracks and softening the gouges left by Kincaid's aborted advance. The cabin stood intact, though Rowan could feel a subtle shift in the air inside, an awareness that the confrontation had marked a point of no return. Vargo sensed it too. He had not fully relaxed since the helicopter departed. Even as he lay near the stove, his ears remained tilted toward the door, tracking distant vibrations no human could isolate. Rowan spent the early evening reinforcing the perimeter. He shoveled a narrow path from porch to woodpile and deliberately left no secondary tracks leading toward the ridge. Then he stacked split logs in a tighter formation near the wall, checked the hinges on the shutters, and repositioned a small motion sensor Elias had installed years earlier beside the back window. It was rudimentary, battery-powered, wired to a bell mechanism, but Rowan appreciated simple systems. They failed loudly. After dark, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky cleared into a black vault pricked with brittle stars. The absence of wind made the quiet feel louder. Rowan brewed coffee he did not need and sat again at the table, rereading a copy of the Federal Survey while Vargo rested with his chin across Rowan's boot. The knock came at 8:42 p.m. 3 measured raps, deliberate and unhurried. Rowan rose without speaking. He did not reach for the shotgun this time. Instead, he moved toward the door with a kind of controlled curiosity. Vargo rose with him, body angled slightly forward. No growl, but no softness either. Rowan opened the door halfway. Sheriff Caleb Rourke stood on the porch, hat absent this time, dark hair flattened by cold. In clearer light, Rowan could see fatigue in his face, fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow beneath them. His broad jaw was set in what might have been resolve or irritation. Snow dusted the shoulders of his wool coat. He looked like a man who had walked rather than driven. "Evening," Rourke said. "Evening." Rourke glanced past Rowan into the cabin, registering the warmth, the table, the dog. His gaze lingered on Vargo with something almost like approval. "Mind if I come in?" Rowan stepped aside. Inside, Rourke removed his gloves slowly, studying the room without comment. But he had the solid build of someone who had once been athletic, but had allowed routine to replace training. There was a steadiness to him that came from long years in a small jurisdiction, knowing everyone, knowing who would call first and who would shoot first. Rowan had been reading him since their first exchange. Rourke wasn't Kincaid's man, but he was not entirely free of the man's gravity either. "Hell of a show this afternoon," Rourke said at last. "You saw it," Rowan replied. "Hard not to. County radio lights up when a helicopter drops into a blizzard." Rourke exhaled slowly. "Whitaker didn't clear it through my office." "Federal review doesn't require county clearance," Rowan said evenly. Rourke's jaw tightened slightly. "You're not wrong." Silence settled briefly between them. I've lived here 22 years," Rourke continued, voice quieter now. "Came back after a deployment of my own, Iraq. Didn't plan on wearing a badge forever. But it suited me. Structure, clear lines." He paused. "Kincaid brought investment when the mills shut down. Jobs, infrastructure, folks don't forget that." "Folks also don't see what's buried under their feet," Rowan replied. Rourke's eyes flicked to the table where survey copies lay. "You certain about what you've found?" "Yes." Rourke studied him for a long moment, searching for hesitation. He found none. "Then this county's about to get complicated," he said. Before Rowan could respond, the faint vibration returned, different from the bulldozer this time, lower, smoother. A convoy. Rourke heard it too. His head tilted slightly toward the door. "That's not mine." Rowan extinguished the overhead lantern, leaving only the stove's glow. He moved to the window, clearing a narrow slit. Through the dark, he saw headlights, 3 sets, approaching slowly along the rutted road. Black SUVs. They stopped at the edge of the clearing but did not advance. Engines idled in controlled rhythm. Doors opened. Men stepped out in coordinated movement. They wore dark parkas without visible logos, boots heavy and insulated. 2 remained near the vehicles. One approached the cabin with measured pace. He was mid-40s, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and a closely shaved head that gleamed faintly under starlight. A trimmed beard lined his jaw, not decorative but maintained. His eyes were narrow, calculating, and pale under the porch light. Rowan switched on deliberately. He carried himself with the contained energy of someone trained in both negotiation and confrontation. Rowan recognized the type immediately. Corporate counsel. He knocked once. Rowan opened the door fully this time, stepping onto the porch. "Mr. Hale," the man said smoothly. "Lucas Merrick, counsel for Kincaid Resource Group." His voice was level, refined, but not flamboyant. He extended a leather-bound folder without entering the cabin. Rowan did not take it immediately. Merrick's gaze flicked briefly to Sheriff Rourke, visible behind Rowan, then back. "We prefer clarity over spectacle," he said. "This is a formal notice of intent to challenge federal claim validity." "You're quick," Rowan replied. Merrick allowed a faint smile. "Preparation is not the same as speed." His features were sharp, while symmetrical in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity. There was no visible tension in his posture. Men like him did not need to raise their voices. "You intend to dispute a sealed strategic reserve?" Rowan asked. "We intend to review classification procedures from 1958 onward," Merrick said calmly. "The Cold War produced many irregular filings." Rourke stepped onto the porch behind Rowan, crossing his arms loosely. "You planning to dig tonight, Mr. Merrick?" Merrick's eyes moved to the sheriff briefly. "No, Sheriff. Tonight we're simply delivering paperwork." Rowan accepted the folder at last. The paper inside was dense, typed in precise legal language questioning jurisdiction, abandonment clauses, and mineral rights reversion. "You think you can outpace federal oversight?" Rowan asked quietly. Merrick met his gaze without blinking. "I think federal oversight often moves slower than capital." A gust of wind swept across the clearing, carrying the scent of diesel from the SUVs. "Tell Kincaid something," Rowan said. Merrick's eyebrow lifted slightly. 45 days, Rowan continued. "He thinks that's my timeline." "And it isn't?" Merrick asked. Rowan's expression did not change. "No." For the first time, something like curiosity flickered across Merrick's face. He inclined his head. "Then we look forward to the coming weeks." He stepped back, signaling subtly to the men near the SUV's doors closed in unison. Engines revved softly. The convoy withdrew without haste. Rourke watched until the taillights vanished. He let out a slow breath. "That wasn't about intimidation." "No," Rowan agreed. That was positioning." Rourke studied him again. "You sure you want this fight?" Rowan looked past him toward the ridge, where the Aurora hatch lay hidden beneath fresh snow. "Didn't start it," he said, "but I won't step aside." Rourke nodded once, as if accepting an inevitable outcome. "Keep me informed," he said quietly. "I don't like surprises." When he left, the clearing fell silent again. Rowan stepped back inside, closed the door firmly, and laid Merrick's folder on the table beside federal survey copies. The legal language was aggressive, but not reckless. Kincaid intended to erode legitimacy, not break it outright. Vargo approached and rested his head against Rowan's hip. Rowan crouched and ran a hand through the dog's thick fur, feeling steady muscle beneath. "They're shifting tactics," he murmured. Vargo's tail thumped once against the floor. Outside, somewhere beyond the ridge, a distant metallic clang echoed faintly. Machinery being repositioned, perhaps, or something heavier settling into place. Rowan stood and added another log to the stove. The fire caught quickly. The storm had passed, but the pressure had not. This was no longer about physical confrontation. It was about fault lines, legal, political, human. And they were widening. The days that followed Merrick's visit were unnervingly calm. No engines carved the ridge at night. No headlights lingered at the clearing's edge. Snow fell, melted slightly under weak sun, and refroze into glassy crust. The cabin settled into a rhythm that almost resembled normalcy. Almost. Rowan woke before first light each morning, as he always had, habit carved into bone. He stepped outside with a mug of black coffee and scanned the horizon before taking a single sip. Vargo padded beside him, breath pluming in soft white bursts. The dog's coat had thickened further with winter. The black along his back looked almost lacquered under pale dawn, while copper flared at his flanks when sunlight struck it. He moved with a measured dignity now, age tempering speed but not resolve. Rowan sometimes wondered whether the dog sensed the deeper tension in him or simply reflected it. Clara returned on the third day after the legal notice, this time with equipment loaded into her Subaru's rear compartment. Sampling kits, portable spectrometer, sealed specimen containers. She wore heavier gloves now and carried herself with sharper focus. There was less academic curiosity in her posture and more urgency. "I ran preliminary isotope analysis on the fragment you gave me," she said without preamble, once inside the cabin. She removed her knit cap, dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were alert, energized. It matches the 1958 data almost exactly. The deposit hasn't degraded. If anything, the concentration levels suggest the core vein remains untouched. Rowan leaned against the table. And that means? It means Kincaid hasn't accessed the primary chamber, she said. If he had, downstream contamination signatures would spike. They haven't. Vargo lay at her feet now, having accepted her scent fully. The first time she had entered the cabin, he'd maintained guarded distance. Now he permitted proximity, occasionally resting his chin briefly against her knee as if acknowledging her presence in Rowan's circle. A knock interrupted them again, but lighter this time. Not the deliberate raps of authority, nor the forceful thud of confrontation. Rowan opened the door cautiously. A man stood on the porch with a camera slung over one shoulder and a wool scarf wound loosely around his neck. He was in his late 30s, lean and slightly stooped from years of hunching over equipment. His beard was uneven, from more habit than style, and his eyes were a restless gray that seemed to measure both angles and consequences simultaneously. Snow clung to his boots in melting clumps. "Name's Daniel Keene," he said, adjusting the strap across his chest. "Freelance investigative journalist, Spokane-based." He glanced past Rowan toward the interior. "Agent Whitaker gave me a call." Rowan did not move aside immediately. "Whitaker calls journalists now? When federal interests collide with private capital in rural counties?" Keene replied calmly. "Sometimes sunlight is cheaper than lawyers." Clara stepped forward behind Rowan. "You verified him?" Keene gave a small, almost weary smile. "I brought credentials." He reached slowly into his jacket and produced press identification, laminated, issued through a reputable national outlet. His hands were steady. Rowan studied him carefully. Keene did not have the posture of someone accustomed to field combat, but there was resilience in his stance. A thin white scar ran along the side of his neck, old and healed. Rowan noticed details like that. "Why you?" Rowan asked. Keene hesitated briefly, as if considering how much truth to offer. "I covered a mine collapse in West Virginia 8 years ago," he said. 37 men trapped underground. Company misreported ventilation inspections for years. I lost a friend in that one." His gaze hardened slightly. "Since then, I pay attention when mining companies say, 'Trust us.'" Rowan stepped aside. Inside, Keene removed his gloves and took in the room with practiced observation. The stove, the documents, the stone sample, Vargo's quiet presence. He did not reach for his camera immediately. Instead, he listened as Clara explained the isotope data, and Rowan described the bunker and Kincaid's escalating tactics. Keene took notes in a small, leather-bound notebook rather than on a laptop. His handwriting was tight and deliberate. When he did lift the camera, he asked permission before capturing a single frame of the documents. "I won't publish location specifics," he said. "Not yet. But a story about a sealed Federal Reserve and attempted private challenge. That gets attention." Rowan folded his arms. Attention can cut both ways. Keene nodded. "That's why you control the narrative before they do." Outside, the low hum returned. Not engines this time, but something subtler. Clara heard it first. "That's not wind." Rowan stepped outside, Vargo at his heel. Across the valley, near the lower ridge, thin columns of smoke rose straight into the cold air. Not wildfire, controlled burn stacks, equipment repositioning. "They're staging," Clara murmured. Keene lifted his camera and zoomed. "Heavy transport trucks," he said. 3 at least." Rowan's jaw tightened. That afternoon, Agent Whitaker returned, not by helicopter this time, but by snow-ready SUV, escorted by a smaller federal vehicle. He exited with his parka unzipped despite the cold, revealing a suit jacket beneath. He looked more like a man preparing for a hearing than a confrontation. "With media present," Whitaker said dryly, nodding toward Keene, "things accelerate." Keene offered a thin smile but remained silent. Whitaker's gaze shifted to Rowan. "Merrick filed preliminary injunction paperwork this morning. They're arguing administrative abandonment, claiming the federal classification lapsed under procedural oversight." Clara scoffed softly. "There's no lapse clause in Cold War strategic reserves." "There is if you can convince a judge there is," Whitaker replied evenly. Rowan stepped closer. "And you?" Whitaker met his eyes. "I'm requesting emergency preservation order, but that buys time, not resolution." Time. The word echoed differently now. As dusk approached, tension thickened across the ridge. The trucks below continued repositioning. Portable floodlights flickered to life, casting harsh white cones across snow. Keene stood beside Rowan on the porch. "They're preparing to show momentum," he said quietly. "Make it look like inevitability." Rowan watched the lights without blinking. Vargo stood pressed against his leg, on muscles, coiled, but silent. Then, the first explosion came, not from the ridge behind the cabin, but from the lower slope across the valley. A controlled detonation, distant but unmistakable. Snow rippled from nearby branches. The sound rolled across the landscape like a physical force. Whitaker swore under his breath. "They're testing seismic response." "They don't have clearance," Clara said sharply. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "They're gambling we won't respond fast enough." Another detonation followed, slightly louder. Keene lifted his camera and began recording. Rowan did not move. His breathing slowed instead, narrowing into something precise. "This is the break," he said quietly. Whitaker turned to him. "We shut this down tonight." Rowan's eyes remained fixed on the floodlit slope. "No," he said evenly. "We shut it down correctly." Wind shifted, carrying the scent of explosives faintly toward the cabin. Vargo's ears flattened briefly before returning upright. The quiet days had been preparation. The fault lines were no longer hidden. They were splitting open in real time. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as flashes of light or voices from the sky. Sometimes they arrive disguised as hardship, as a frozen mountain, a sealed door, or a second chance no one expected. Rowan didn't win because he was stronger than everyone else. He won because he stood his ground when fear told him to run, because he chose integrity over money, because he refused to let something sacred be stolen. And maybe that's how God works. Not always by removing the storm, but by giving you the strength to stand inside it. Maybe the miracle wasn't the mine. Maybe it was the timing, the right document surviving, the right people showing up, the truth surfacing before it was too late. Maybe it was a reminder that even when you feel forgotten, you are not. In our daily lives, we face smaller mountains, bills, loss, doubt, loneliness. We may not uncover buried treasure beneath our feet, but we all stand at moments where we must choose courage over comfort, faith over fear. And sometimes, when you take that step forward, God meets you there. If this story touched your heart, take a moment right now. Comment below where you are watching from. Share this video with someone who needs hope. Subscribe so you never miss stories that remind us light still breaks through darkness. And may God bless you and your family. May He protect your home, strengthen your spirit, and guide your path, especially when the road ahead feels uncertain. Because quiet miracles still happen. And sometimes they begin with you.